Welcome back, Looney listeners, to another episode of Intrepid, a Mutant podcast. This episode, it's sidekick revenge, not the run. Ray has stupidly decided to leave me in charge while he's off at work this week, so I'm here to burn down the temple that Ray created, but luckily I won't be alone. As I'm here to review the latest issue of the Bemis run, I'm joined with two superstar special guests. You've heard their beautiful melodic tones before. We're joined by Tommy and Chad. Boys, how you doing?
Great. Happy to be here.
Doing super.
There you go, that was Tommy and Chad just there. If this is your first episode, thanks for joining us. We have these two boys here. So without further ado, let's get into it. So boys, it was Free Comic Book Day this past week. You guys managed to get out to your store.
Chad, go for it.
I did not, because I live about an hour away, so, not that great.
Yeah.
And I live about 60 seconds away from my favorite and local comic store, but I unfortunately was not able to go out. My wife's best friend got married yesterday, and that was what I was doing, going to a wedding. So, but I do want to give a shout out to my local comic store, Tardy's Collector's Corner, Gavin, Deanna, the owners, and Abby, their faithful helper. They had a really cool program set up. They gave away the 52 free comics to somebody that had posted on Facebook and had kind of blown up their advertising. And they also gave away a signed Venom print that was sent by Marvel, I think, or maybe by Sony, for the upcoming Venom movie with Tom Hardy. And they also gave away a bunch of Hulk hero clicks from the Thor Ragnarok series to the first 30 customers at the store. So I'm just like, I know a lot of Loonies have a lot of favorite local comic stores, but mine in Grand Rapids, Michigan, they always do a great job. And I wish I could have gone, but I know that they're going to save a couple issues for me for next week. So.
Oh, nice. As someone who firmly believes that comics are more important than weddings, I will very much say that I made it to Free Comic Book Day. Part of my cat is attacking my microphone. Excuse that. He doesn't like Free Comic Book Day.
Yeah.
A bit of a twat. Yeah, I made it to mine. Kaboom Comics is my local one in Toowoomba. If we somehow manage to have some listener who is also in this kind of backwater big town. Kaboom Comics is a great little store. They really just love getting people into comics. Kids especially. Like, my mum, who's a teacher, went in with me, and they were happy to just, without even asking for it, give away a bunch of comics for her classroom and stuff like that outside of, the free comic book stand stuff as well, just getting kids in the comic. Everyone in the comics. I smashed out a whole bunch of specials down there. Got my free comics. Marvel put out some good ones. We got Avengers, Spidey, New Coats, Captain America looking good. And I got the Transformers one, because in the end, that's all I care about. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a fraud. We're on a Moon Knight podcast.
So they had Ta-Nehisi Coates Spider-Man? Or Captain America?
Yeah, in the Avengers Free Comic Book Day special at the back, you got a preview for it, and it looked really good.
Nice, awesome. Because one of the reasons that I picked up Black Panther, 2 or 3 years ago was because Ta-Nehisi Coates was getting on that. And he's one of the most, I feel, one of the most important voices in America right now. And when I saw that he was coming in to write some Marvel comics and Black Panther no less, I jumped on that, and I've really enjoyed his Black Panther run, and we'll see where it goes with this whole Black Panther in space. But writing Captain America, that's what America needs right now. So I'm looking forward to that.
Couldn't have said it better myself, and it's really good. So hopefully, if your store still has a copy of that left behind, they'll get that there. But yeah, I hope everyone listening managed to get it to free comic book day this last weekend. Hopefully snagged a deal, free comics, and just support your local store because comic book stores are pretty important, you know? I mean, we could all go digital, but that kind of sucks. I like digital a bit. Shops, though, also pretty nice. But I started explaining most things. So, Ray, while not here, decided to fill in my job for me at being the best host of this podcast, and he interviewed two creators down at his local in Sydney. King's Comic is a massive comic book store I wish I could go to. They're fantastic. They have their own podcast, Serious Issues, run from the King's Comic place. But Ray almost taking over Tommy's man on the street shenanigans this time, but instead we'll just call him just a reporter, just a lousy reporter. You know, nothing more. He managed to get two from Tom Taylor and Nicola Scott. So starting off, we'll add in his little interview, not review, with Tom Taylor.
Great idea. Hello, this is Ray from Into the Night, a Moon Knight podcast, just here at Free Comic Book Day at King's Comics in Sydney. I've had the pleasure of having a signing done by Tom Taylor himself for my X-Men Red. And just want to say, hey Tom, how are you going?
I'm very well, thank you.
I just want to take 15 seconds of your time. I just wanted to see what makes Free Comic Book Day important for you?
I think, it's pretty obvious that comics are the single greatest storytelling medium in the world, so I think anything that brings more people to comics, to this medium, is fantastic, and that's why I'm always at these things. I'm happy to do these things for free and just be here and make sure that people experience these things.
Tom, just want to say, as a fan, we really appreciate you always taking time for the fans and having a chat, so really appreciate it as well. Also as well, apart from, say, the X-Men stuff, can I ask any projects that you are currently working on or that you want to give a shout-out to?
Sure, so currently working on Injustice 2 for DC Comics, just finishing up on Wolverine, doing Adamantium Agenda for Marvel as well, which is Spider-Man, Iron Man, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage miniseries crossover, which is fun, and the Deep TV series, which is on globally, and a bunch of other stuff. I stay busy.
Cool. Excellent, Tom. You've got definitely no shortage of work over there. Just finally as well, a little quick one, because we are a Moon Knight podcast. Moon Knight. Any favourite runs then?
I'm not sure of my favourite run. I've more recently, I like what Max Bemis is doing at the moment. I really liked the art choices that Declan Shelby did, with the pure white. It was just a beautiful idea with Warren Ellis. Warren Ellis is always a genius, but that run ran really well together. And I've loved other stuff. I liked him in when he came into Ultimate Spider-Man and things like that. He's a great character.
Fantastic, Tom. Thank you so much for your time. And Loonies, please catch any of Tom's work. He's killing it with the mutants at the moment. So thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ray, and thanks, Tom. Tom Taylor, big fan of his. He's writing all new Wolverine, X-Men Red, Injustice. He plugged, but been a big fan of his. I saw his panel while I was down at Sydney Gold Coast, and just a big comic book fan. Doesn't surprise me that he's a Moon Knight fan as well. I imagine he's probably read just about every hero on the shelves. I think we can all agree the Ellis run, pretty up there.
Yeah.
Shelby, master of his craft. He just about knows most superheroes of this stuff. I'd be excited to hear him on a Moon Knight book anytime soon, or just have him in a run of his. We also have an artist I'd love to see on that run with Nicola Scott, which I'll hand back to Ray for their interview.
Okay, Loonies, here at Free Comic Book Day at King's, Sydney, and I've had the pleasure of having some action comics signed by Nicola Scott. Hi, Nicola, how are you?
Hi there, how are you, everybody?
That's good. Look, I just thought I would assault Nicola with a couple of questions. First off, Nicola, as well, apart from, Wonder Woman, and of course Black Magic as well from Image, what are other projects in the works that you can probably talk about?
in the works. Look, they're the only things that I can fit in at the moment. Black Magic in particular is quite a sort of long form, it's slower to produce book because I paint the whole thing. Wow. So yeah, that's pretty time consuming. I was doing a series of Mirror covers because Mirror had her own title for a mini-series leading up to the Aquaman movie coming out later this year. That series is still coming out. And besides that, there are a couple of things that are in the pipeline, but they're quite sort of a fair way off as yet. So it's sort of premature for me to talk about it because we're only just starting to talk about it now with the companies.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. And something I asked Tom Taylor a bit earlier as well, why do you think Free Comic Book Days are important for both fans and for creators like yourself?
Oh, look, I think it's one of the very few international events that comic fans, comic retailers, and comic creators all over the world can participate all at the same time. You know, it's like a convention happening concurrently globally, and that in itself is quite the thrill.
Yeah, fantastic. Just a couple of final questions based on Moon Knight, because this is a Moon Knight podcast. Are you aware of Moon Knight, or do you know much about Moon Knight?
I am aware of Moon Knight. I don't know a lot about Moon Knight.
Okay, no worries. Look, I personally would love to have you on artwork doing Moon Knight. I think you would draw an awesome Moon Knight as well. Just last question, Moon Knight versus Wonder Woman. Who do you think will win?
Wonder Woman every single time.
Of course.
Sorry.
Of course. Thank you so much, Nicola, for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Nicola. Sad that she hasn't read any Moon Knight. I'm not gonna lie. Which one would you guys recommend, admittedly, to a first-time reader?
My go-to is always 2006. You know.
To that? Oh.
So get on the Houston. You see Marc at his lowest. There's, as we see with 194, there's a little bit of Origin mixed into that run. Honestly, I would say do Houston, jump into Vengeance of the Moon Knight, and then hit Lemire and fall in love. Because with Houston, you get some of that dirty, raw action. You get some of the backstory. You see the character at his lowest. With Lemire, you get a little bit more of the refined, coming to know the character through that meta perspective, or trying to understand his psychology as he too is trying to understand his psychology. And that's where you fall in love. But Vengeance of the Moon Knight has some great action, just pure action. That's the Heroic Age, which I know not too many people enjoyed that run. That was like 2009, 2010, 2011. But honestly, the Houston, get into Vengeance of the Moon Knight, Lemire's run, that I think would seal the deal for a lot of people.
Chad?
I'm going to be cliche and actually completely agree with Tommy on this one. I really love the intense action of the Houston run. Everything seems really, how do I put this? In his element. Like, just the way that Marc interacts with things. It supports my theory, this complete bonkers conspiracy theory I have that Marc is actually a mutant. Because he just accomplishes crazy, insane feats of, dexterity and strength. He's gotta be meta on some level. And then...
Man, I'm gonna challenge you on that later today, Chad. With 194, respectfully though, because I think that's a really cool idea. But with 194, I think we got a few nuggets to explore, so...
Well, I suppose we can go mining together.
So, there you go. We're going to go back in time and send Ray to give Nicola those suggestions, because he can rep the boy enough. So, hopefully, next time we see Nicola, once we go back in time, she'll have read the Houston run, fall in love, and we can expect her art on a Moon Knight book soon. Because she is amazing. I'm not sure if you guys have ever read Black Magic, but it's about witches and cops. And it's in like black and white with a bit of color, but needed with these great, pencils. Just amazing. So yeah, thank you, Ray, for dropping in those 2 interviews. Two incredible creators. We actually have some wonderful talent down in Australia. Luckily, we're not that backwater. We have those 2 incredible people. So if that is enough, you can get stuffed. Thanks, Ray. There is a reason we're here, and it's not just Free Comic Book Day, I guess. Although we do love Free Comic Book Day. We're here to talk Moon Knight. Boys, there's not much news this week. I'm not gonna lie. We got a bit of here and there, but before we actually jump into the news, have you guys read anything recently? Anything Moon Knight related? Anything generally related?
For news, yeah, no, not much. I think the last 2 weeks have been built, and the Moon Knight news cycle have been built upon Kevin Feige saying that, yeah, maybe Moon Knight one time in the future, but probably not. And
I know it's real, but
yeah, I realize that he's a comic book character, but I'd rather have Nova before him. So, that's kind of really pushed me, over the last, year with ITK, but also just the last, I don't know, maybe 3 years with the Netflix series of, hey, maybe Moon Knight will show up. Because originally, hey, maybe Punisher will show up, and then Punisher does, and then he gets his own show. And then, hey, maybe Moon Knight will show up. Maybe they'll do like a Daredevil run where Daredevil takes over the Hand, and Moon Knight comes in. But at this point, I'll believe it when I see it. I'm not getting my hopes up on anything related to MCU with Moon Knight. We'll see it. I want it to happen, but I'd much rather see, which is one of the news items that we'll discuss here in a second, but a tie-in series with Moon Knight and other Marvel heroes in the comics. So
yeah, and I mean, yeah, we haven't had popped up. I've been sort of keeping up my pull list. I've seen Infinity War a couple of times now. I've read some Transformers comics, and then I basically just read my Free Comic Book Day ones and the leftovers, so I wouldn't even know if he's appeared in any comics recently. So look, I think I'll take this one. I suck. I'm sorry, everyone. Yeah, I think Chad, reading anything exciting or anything Moon Knight related?
I've been trying to pick up on this new Thanos line that they've been pushing. The one with Frank Castle as Ghost Rider, Cosmic Ghost Rider.
Oh yeah,
and that's just crazy. Like everything that goes on with the Cosmic Ghost Rider also being Thanos' hand, and everything that comes along with the Fallen One. Have you heard about that?
Yeah. Did you read the annual as well?
Yeah.
Oh god, it was so good. It's so brutal. Kate's did our Damnation run, but this one he just went full on, basically screaming death metal at Thanos as we watched him kill the universe and all these crazy shenanigans. Such a good run. But yeah, I think I guess we'll get into our bit of news then. The first one, hopefully you guys have seen, that Greg Smallwood has returned to Moon Knight, technically. Deadpool variants are happening next month, where basically Marvel pumps out a bunch of variant covers for all its books that involve Deadpool. You got Deadpool 2 coming out, and for Moon Knight 195, Greg Smallwood did an amazing Moon Knight Deadpool crossover cover. You guys check it out?
Yeah, I saw it the other day. I'm pretty excited for it.
So yeah, it's like this fantastic, gritty, just dirty cover of a Deadpool Moon Knight crossover fighting mummies. It's like, and just Smallwood doing all the great intricate detail. It'll be in show notes, but I mean, I don't pick up variants enough, I guess, small store and all that, but this is one you kind of got to get. Hopefully this one's a bit more ubiquitous than some.
Yeah, and the cool thing with variants, though, and I know that with Secret Empire, I want to say with some of their variants, it was a little difficult to get into, and with the Legacy variants, local stores had to order 2.5 times their usual pull to get some of the variants. But I want to say that I want to say that with these Deadpool variants, these might be direct orders. So if you do have a local comic shop, you may be able to talk to your store owners, and they may be able to just request that variant be sent without any incentive for the actual store. And there probably is going to be an upcharge of about $1, but you know what? Part of that goes your local comic shop's way, so good for them.
Hell yeah. Actually, that is one thing, Marvel sucks for variant publishing, but I think Moon Knight, this latest Moon Knight run, has been pretty variant cover bare. Have we got any? I guess.
Just for the first issue, you had the
Oh, really?
you had the character head promo. There was the fantastic, I forget who did the art, but the fantastic issue or cover with Moon Knight's cape on fire. I want to say there were 5 or 6 variants for the first issue.
Right.
In fact, I have them right next to me. I would pull them out, but I got stacks of other comics on top of them. And they're all Moon Knight comics, trust me. But, But I do think that, but for each of these subsequent issues, so we're on to the 7th issue with 194 right now from 187. And I don't think that there's been any variance for the 2nd through 7th issues of Bemis's run. So,
well, I mean, admittedly, yeah. I think this is one you got to get. I've got a few of Smallwood's covers before. He did an amazing one for Grass Kings, and his style of white and scratchy pencils and intricate detail is amazing. So,
and just figure
pick that
like
up.
the Archie comics too, right? I know you and Ray have spoken about those, but like the
yeah.
Vampirella, like I was thinking about picking up Vampirella and getting into some of those Archie comics, but you have to say no at some point, right? But boy, I mean, just the art, and not just on the cover, but in that Vampirella issue, I flicked through it in my shop, and he's just a cool artist, There's something about, and I know that we'll talk about it later today because of Templeton in issue 194. His art borrows from Smallwood, to say the least. But Greg Smallwood just has an incredibly interesting style, and I hope he comes back to Moon Knight someday.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're talking about Ty Templeton's art, and we'll see the impact Smallwood had on the issue in just a bit. But in very much unrelated news, just because we like Jeff Lemire, and he did mention this one would be taking cues from how, with what he did with Moon Knight, art for his Century run has dropped online. Some previews for it. Incredible. Kim Jacinto on art. Pumping out stuff. I mean, technically this isn't Moon Knight at all. Why did I add him? I don't know. I think they just look great. I think if you love Jeff Lemire, if you loved his Moon Knight run, I think this Century one's gonna deliver just as fantastically.
And something too to say though about the Century, Lemire, Moon Knight, there is a connection in that the Century and Moon Knight have a fairly important interaction in 2009's Vengeance of the Moon Knight, and that. I'd have to say I don't keep up with the Cosmic characters that well, but I want to say that heroic age with the entrance of the Sentry was one of the last times that the Sentry played a fairly important role in Marvel Comics, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, listeners and Chad and Connor. But while Vengeance of the Moon Knight was not written by Lemire, that was an important interaction between Moon Knight and the Sentry, and now we have one of the greatest Moon Knight writers, Lemire, taking on the Sentry. So who knows, maybe Moon Knight will come into that, and maybe he will play a role on the street level. But, I do think it's enough to say, though, that just as we saw Jeff Lemire did such an incredible job exploring the psyche of Mark Spector in his 2016 run with Moon Knight, the Sentry is a character that is built upon like two selves, right? With the Sentry and the Void, and that's a character that Jeff Lemire knows how to write. So I am very excited to see what he does with that.
Hell yeah! So he played a part in Donny Cates' Doctor Strange run before Damnation.
Oh, that's right. That's
kind
right.
Of a small
Yeah,
part.
just about within the last year.
And I believe this one sort of jumps off that position, so check that out. I'm guessing some of you have been reading his Damnation run, so if you haven't read the rest of his Doctor Strange run, go back 6 issues. Fantastic. Gotta do it for yourself. And then I guess if nothing to add to my adding in previews that don't belong, bit of a discussion. We'll add some spoilers in here. But Damnation finished last week before, possibly, depending on our dates. And it teased something coming for the future, a possible Midnight Suns run.
Yes.
How are we feeling about this?
I'm super excited. I think the optimism, because let's see, was it Smallwood that was doing the art for
Yeah.
Midnight Suns over the last year on
Well, I
Twitter?
did like yeah, like a preview
And the
sort of.
concepts, and again, that had not been accepted by Marvel, but the idea too that Smallwood would be asked to come back to do the art for that, I think that's very exciting. But and I was trying to pull the issue from my stack here, but if I recall, there's this kind of there's this ending, there's this denouement after Damnation 4 where Wong is it Doctor Strange that brings everybody back to the Sanctum Sanctorum because Wong is still in hell, and so Doctor Strange brings some, not all, of the Midnight Suns. Like I want to say that like Man-Thing isn't there. I want to say it's Blade and it's Moon Knight and it might be Elsa Bloodstone, but not all of the original group from Damnation is present in the Sanctum Sanctorum, and Doctor Strange just throws out these manila folders of images of potential Midnight Suns, and you see a number of different characters. I want to say like Clea's involved with that, Doctor Strange's old flame. But I really like that idea that, hey, we're going to have multiple teams. We're going to have different groupings of individuals, and Moon Knight will hopefully be a part of that, and hopefully will be rewritten as a stronger character because he was garbage in Damnation.
Absolutely.
But but I just think that the idea that the Midnight Suns is something that Marvel is thinking about working with is really cool. This idea that we're going to get back into horror on a mainstream, or we're going to get back into this idea that we're dealing not always with the cosmic and always with the street level and always with the Avengers, but that there are these other realms of the Marvel universe, and obviously there are different subgroups of readers that have an interest in this. So I was really excited. I love those 3 extra pages that they added into Was it Damnation 4 or was it the last Doctor Strange issue? Do you know?
I think it was Damnation 4.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like the shot of him throwing like a bunch of photos on the table.
Dossiers, really.
There's like help.
Yeah, there's a good way. I mean, it was almost like he was Doctor Strange was the Nick Fury, right? He had done all this background research and he had found out all this information about these different individuals, what their strengths were, what their weaknesses were. But considering that Doctor Strange has been the manipulator, right? I mean, that's something too that I'm wondering how they're going to rectify that, because with the new Doctor Strange arc, he is like out in space, just like Black Panther is, trying to find himself or trying to find his his source of magic or whatever it is going to be. So I do think that there's some anachronistic sentiment to that, like that maybe that moment isn't necessarily in line with the Doctor Strange comic and the Avengers comics and the Moon Knight comics, that maybe this is just kind of happening in the background and we can just assume that all the characters are doing their own thing. They're all their normal selves, aside from wherever their current arcs happen to be. So regardless, I'm still very excited about the potential for Midnight Suns.
Yeah, I mean, we have the Spirits of Vengeance from okay, probably not terrible. And Marvel does kind of have a history of writers setting up something that never comes to fruition. I think this was a fairly well-selling event. I think it got a lot of chatter, even if it wasn't like my personal favorite or something like that. And I really think this could be something that happens in the future. This is sort of a demand and by fans. So I mean, I definitely want it. It also depends on the creative team. Like even this one kind of showed that even a great creator like Tony Cates doesn't get characters like Moonlight, right? So yeah, I mean, we'll be keeping an eye out for any snippet of that, but hopefully that actually comes to fruition.
Especially if Bats is involved.
Oh yeah, we need him. Like, because I mean, sounds like Mark Wade isn't using him at all when he goes into space. So
I mean, Bats was the saving grace for Damnation. That, I mean, what a cool character, you know?
especially in the times, just down in hell. Oh, absolutely, just love it. Um, anything else on that, boys?
Let's call up Greg Smallwood. Let's all the loonies hit him up on Twitter and ask him what he's doing and put some fire behind him. Because I think that
Yeah, he's
a
still
Midnight Suns with Greg Smallwood at the pen would be great to get some art in there.
Completely agree.
he's still doing variant covers, so he's not gone for good. We just need to just pull him into it a bit more. Don't do that, but let's do that. All right, decided. Glad we're all in agreement. But while we're here, we've gotten through some news. Yeah, pretty light weeks. I think actually one sort of thing I didn't get time around checking, so I'll do a spotlight on it next week. Hopefully, there's been some like those Etsy and fan made books that have had like Moon Knight in them. Have you guys seen some of those popping around the group?
No?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, let's see if I can pull it up. I don't want to say that's an Etsy book. I think that's something that's actually licensed by Marvel. DC put some of
Oh,
these out,
really?
and I purchased the Wonder Woman one, the Batman one, the Green Lantern one for my eldest son, and he absolutely loves them. And they're character education books basically. But a loony posted this, and I've got it queued up here. I think. Let's see who it was. Okay. Joel Lewis, who interviewed Lemire not too long ago, I think, right? It was Lemire?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Marvel has licensed this. It's a book written by
Oh,
Brendan
yeah.
Deneen, pictures by Cale Atkinson. It's called Night Night Groot. And one of the panels is Rocket Raccoon, putting presumably baby Groot or elementary age Groot to sleep. And Moon Knight is there kind of watching over Groot. And the line in the book is, they'll keep watch over you and guard the door. And so, presumably Rocket has told Groot that, don't worry, go to sleep. We have heroes that are going to protect you while you sleep. And Moon Knight is guarding the door, which is pretty cool. And it's, he's in an all-white outfit. He's got his classic crescent belt. The crescent moon is in the right direction. Take that, Damnation. But he also has this black inner cape, which is really cool, and it offsets against the white costume. And I would absolutely, Connor, I'm glad you reminded us of that, because I think that's so cool that here we have a children's book that has, characterized these Marvel characters of Groot and Rocket Raccoon as something that is totally family friendly. And we have a hero like Moon Knight, who's always thrown to the side. He's always thrown into the gutter. And I just like the idea that, like, my son, he knows that I love Moon Knight. He knows who Moon Knight is. If he sees him in a comic or a picture, he can say, "Oh, that's Moon Knight." But if I were to read this book to him, I just like the idea that here we have a children's book, and he can point to that character that I love so well, just as well as the Three Little Pigs or, any other classic character that I've grown up with. And here Moon Knight is in just a subtle way. So I really like that idea. I think it's really cool, and I'm glad it's not another Captain America, another Wolverine, another Iron Man, just to keep it popular with the movies. But here we have a really interesting character, and it's in a medium that children will easily recognize him. So I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, wow. I can't believe it's licensed. Yeah, I just added a link to the book so we'll be able to order it in as well. It's fairly recent. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's another book like that I'll look into. It was in the group some time ago and put that in next week. But hell yeah, get your kids in the Moon Knight through one page. That's awesome. All right. Okay. Well, there's been a longer news segment than I was expecting. That was pretty great. Got a children's book out, all I need. So now we'll go over the moon. This week we're looking at Moon Knight, Volume 9, 194, the seventh issue in the Max Bemis Moon Knight run. It is a sort of one-shotty sort of issue with Templeton taking over Jason Burrows while he's been away for a bit. And for us, instead of me blabbing on about it, we have Chad here to do a lovely bare bones.
Alright, so this is the bare bones for Moon Knight issue 194. Writer is Max Bemis. Artist, Ty Templeton. Colorist is Kieran Smith. Letterer is VC's Corey Pettit. Cover artist is Becky Clunan. And the design is Nick Russell. Mark Spector and Frenchie sit down at a kitchen table, armed with mugs full of muddy servings of coffee. The discussion? Deciding, if they weren't mercenary turned vigilantes, what vocation they'd pursue. Duchamp posits that Mark could be a Brad doppelganger with his chiseled jaw. Spector disagrees. He is not interested in being a knockoff. He's a creator. His imagination is active, almost like it's someone else's life entirely. No freaks, no threats, no more bloody last stands. But Mark knows that to be free of his visceral talents, it'd be a life not his own and not his origin. Cutting back into time, the Spectre of Vengeance reviews his new case. Rabbi Yitz Perlman, a real cut-up. Perlman delivers his joke to a crowded dinner table with his fellowship in faith. A young Mark sits at the sideline as the punchline drops, bringing the Hasidic hall to laughter. According to Disembodied Spectre, Yitz has the best jokes, a real funny man. Play-by-play through history, there's nothing funnier to the Jews than making fun of their own kind. Arguably, leading MO is comedy in concert with catastrophe, via oppression on one land or another. The cycle is endless according to Mark. His people thrive on some kind of hate. The humor may be a selling point, and it certainly has purchased young Mark's adoration of Yeats. As his handiwork would entail later in life, Mark is driven to be an explorer, leading him to the bowels of his synagogue storage cellar, a la certain fedora-clad whip-wielders. More in tune with those out of his age group, and wise beyond his years, Mark keeps a term for Perlman, Shoah. He asks about this word to his father, a specter of sadness, insisting his acuity and readiness for darker works and a life of black nights. He is old enough to be in adult circles, birds and bees and genocide of nationalist pride. Grandpa Spector met Yeats during the Shoah, and it was the Shoah that relocated the family from native lands in Czechoslovakia, the old country. Another scene marks idle banter with Yeats, cheerful and honest. Swing by after 7, Yeats says to the young man. Study and fellowship is never a down note with a rabbi. Much like Mark later in life, his father has vapid moments of lapsed sanity. He would zone out, where in his place there would be a man absently doing chores in sort of fugue state. There was always a man behind the curtains, but sometimes the light show died down. Marc wanted to know his father, almost as much as he wanted to bolt for Yeats's after study. Early bird gets the worm. With the rabbi's office locked, Marc goes down into the depths of detective mode in the synagogue basement again. A hatch is all the treasure he lusts for today, a trapdoor in lieu of menorah. Always delving deeper, out of his own depth should be Marc's first tattoo. With a heave of Herculean effort, Marc rips the rope and latch from the door and loses his balance, plummeting into the abyssal shelf of the unknown. Down in the darkness, a dim light and a glimmer of fright. Reminders: Yeats was free after 7. Perlman has a sinister light painting shadow across his face, but Marc has no such glamour. All fear and a bloody nose, vying for an explanation from Uncle Yeats. The truth is offered to Marc, silence for sincerity. Nothing is what it seems, and the shadow is more blessing than the light could ever bring. Uncle Yeats has a calm expression that is daunting, his facade a cornerstone. The light summons recognition of a young man, hanging by his feet via the ceiling. Yeats Perlman, real name, Ernst. The boy is dripping with blood, face bound, body chained to the darkness from above. Ernst kneels to Marc and starts another joke. The red Crovy is no laughing matter to Marc. A rabbi, a Nazi, and a serial killer. An interesting assortment, bar none. As Marc makes a break for the ladder, Yeats deftly snatches his foot and slams Spectre to the ground. Stunned, the prepubescent boy witnesses that the body is yet living, that Ernst is yet decent, and Marc is yet ready for adulthood after all. Yeats proclaims that the grandfather in Czechoslovakia was a desperate and idiotic man. Some intrigue back in time. Nazis, misdirection, misinformation. The darkness that looms in the hearts of men. It stretches the shadow of Yeats's life. The primordial ooze that boils inside the gray matter of his brain is an enhanced metahuman device. Ernst loves killing Jews. It paints his eyes in blackness and his blade in catharsis. Ernst reveals the Shoah to Marc, that the Holocaust was the Shoah, that the Holocaust was engineered to be a running experiment on turning a Yeats into an Ernst. The horror is far from kosher, there's no safety in numbers. Marlene and Beatrice make a scenescape spanning years in Marc's timeline, pouring the layers of sediment into Marc. Everything has led to this moment from years ago. Marc lunges at Yeats in the cellar of sin, burying his teeth in the rabbi's arm, the same teeth that the Sun King will punch out. Marc is lifted off the ground only with one arm of effort, and Ernst slams Marc's back against the stone and cement. One left cross from our youthful avenger, and he is free from this trap. He springs for the ladder, out of historical hell. Uncle Yeats calls out after escaping protege, a vow to return, to always come back. Not Moon Knight yet, but powerful enough in resolve. Marc is now strong enough to stand for something other than another day, with Yeats transferring to another synagogue. Marc was safe for this briefest moment in time. The time passes, and the hunter-killer of Ernst would be back. As Frenchie thanks his closest friend for trusting him with this new, deep revelation to the heart of Mark Spector, he comments that the honor is also horrifying. The honor is horrifying after all, and that amongst this problem, he must still confess his long-standing mental health concerns to his daughter, so he can understand a few things about her father as well. Alone in her room, Mark walks Dietrich through the words, then explains the synopsis of his mental dissonance. Lots of weird things going on, probably something that's been in the family, can't help it. Laying back, relaxing in the beige and manila bed, they talk through trauma and how Uncle Jake and Stephen are there. That through our friends and family, we can fight fear and foe, such as Uncle Yeats, with his evil grin and surgical sins.
Thanks, Chad. Always appreciated those incredible tones. We can set that to a nice beat. We can sell that. What's that big movement? Like voice ASMR or something. Yeah, that's that. That's bare bones for you. That's what we deliver week to week. So, my fellow loonies on the pod, what do you think of this issue? Just general thoughts before we get into is the first sort of one-shot story in the next part of Max Bemis's new redefining Moon Knight run.
Chad, you did the bare bones. Why don't you go first?
So I really liked this issue. Like, I would honestly think that, well, it's actually kind of difficult to go on about because I have conflicting ideas about it. I like that it picks up on not just Mark, but his family and his family's history, and it's very rarely touched on what exactly has been going on in the Spectre household. And as it develops, it's revealed that, Uncle Yeats is not exactly what he seems, that he has relatively non-specific enhancements involving his brain, and I honestly think that it might lend to the possibility that Mark has these enhancements, possibly drifted down through his grandfather's work with Uncle Yeats.
And that's where I'm going to challenge you tonight, I think. I really enjoyed this issue. I thought it was great. Now that we're kind of getting in what we think are these one-offs, with the next issue bringing in the collective, and then I'm blanking on what's going to happen in 196 based off of previews, but I know that in 197 we've got this cover and a description that talks about multiple serial killers or multiple criminals all kind of coming together to try to attack Moon Knight. But the idea that we have all of these one-offs that are going to serve a purpose to develop the character of Mark Spector, I really enjoyed it. I know that 194 has received a great deal of criticism because, again, it's another origin story, and I think more on that later. But I thought that, again, coming in out of Legacy, coming into the new Marvel movement here with the new editor-in-chief and trying to build, another starting point for potential new fans, I really enjoyed this. And so I know that there's a couple things that I really want to focus on in our discussion, but I would say that overall I was happy that I bought this issue.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm with both of you, and definitely Chad, that there's a lot of really good stuff here. I think this works really well as both as a one shot and part of a continuing story that really saw those plot threads in the first arc kind of mean more, and I think it works itself really well into Moon Knight canon. It's respectful to sort of everything that's come before it, but there's some specific elements with how the sort of elements, I suppose, almost thematically that I take some issue with, and I kind of uh yeah, just sort of some things just don't always sit right with me for this issue. But I think I'm not sure where to start or who wants to start with their first aspect here.
Well, I think why don't we start with religion, because that's one of the overarching themes that I think is most present throughout Mark Spector's tenure in Marvel Comics. Is this idea that he's run away from the faith that he was born into, and then he adopted a new faith with Khonshu. Perhaps that was forced upon him, but then he at times has rejected that faith. So, I mean, is that okay with you guys? We kind of start with the idea of religion.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
by all means.
Okay.
So one of the
Kind of go for it.
I'll just add in quickly that one of the big things about this is actually that I have no idea whether Bemis is still a practicing Jewish man, but he was raised in a strong Jewish community. His parents part of the Jewish faith, and his grandparents even were I believe actually Auschwitz survivors from back then, which he is you know involved into powerful subject matters on his albums and stuff. This definitely comes from a place of actual history and his own faith in here as well.
And this is something that I can't, act that I know of. I was raised Roman Catholic. I, could tell you about my own faith journey some other time. But I can say that I have a deep appreciation for Judaism, because my entire childhood came out of a faith that came directly out of Judaism, when looking at it through a traditional lens. And so I have always thought that Mark Spector as a Jewish character was something that was really cool, because even though in the communities that I grew up in Metro Detroit, Judaism did not seem like it was Jewish individuals did not seem like they were a minority where I was growing up. I still had this understanding that to be a Jew was to be a minority in my communities. And so, a number of my friends growing up were Jewish, and that was something that I always was pretty aware of, that in conversations with some of my best friends, that they saw themselves as almost being an outsiders within the nation within which they lived, of the United States. And so I've always just had this interest in understanding Judaism, and I think that that's absolutely something that has drawn me to Mark Spector as a character, because Mark Spector, Moon Knight, Jake Lockley, Stephen Grant, they're all outsiders. Even though Stephen Grant tries to use his wealth to get a leg up in society, we've read that character in Max Bemis's run as the one aspect or the one personality that is always on the outside. Stephen Grant seems to have the ear of Khonshu. He seems to be closest with Khonshu throughout those first 6 issues of Bemis's run, but at the same time, he's the one that's always on the outside. The focus has always been on Mark and Jake Lockley. And so I think that the idea that we are now exploring Mark's reaction to his father as a rabbi, his reaction to his upbringing in the Jewish faith, and his upbringing in any religious faith, but in an orthodoxy here, is something that's incredibly interesting. But two, the rejection, we can talk about this forever. We have another origin story. I know that this on Reddit at least has received a great deal of criticism. Like, why do we need to create a new origin story? We know that Mark's Jewish. We know that his father was maybe a lackluster father. We know that Marc kind of pushed away from his father, and ergo pushed away from his faith. And then the irony of then coming to worship an Egyptian god that empowers Marc, and there's this idea that this is maybe the struggle of every child that's raised in some strict faith. Is something that is interesting to explore, but is it regurgitated over and over and over again? But I do have to say that I really enjoyed this. I have a couple notes here too, that if any listeners or any loonies that are interested in exploring the religious background of Marc Spector, one of the earliest examples that you can go to is from the original run, issue number 37, which was the penultimate issue from Moon Knight's first run. But this was written by, I want to say it's Alan Zelenitz. I think it's Alan Zelenitz. But that issue explored Doug Mensch's, excuse me, first characterization of Marc as a Jewish individual. But Houston's 2006 run, number 4, goes back into talk a little bit more about Marc's father as a rabbi and how Marc pushed back against him. Vengeance of the Moon Knight, Hurwitz's 2009 run. Let's see, I think that's issue number 3. And that's the same issue, ironically, where Bushman is resurrected from his grave. And then there's a flashback, too, where Marc is, we learn a little bit about his father. We learn a little bit about his brother Randall. And we learn a little bit about his Jewish background. And then, of course, Jeff Lemire's 2016 run, issue number 10, where we have the beginnings of what I think Max Bemis was trying to explore with this origin in issue number 10, where we see Marc in his yarmulke on the street. He meets Stephen Grant for the first time, and it's just, it's a mirror image of himself. Marc has a conversation with Khonshu outside the office of a psychiatrist. But it's just, I don't know. I think that this whole issue exploring Marc's Jewish background was something that hasn't properly happened for 30 years. And I think that it's about time. There's a couple articles online that maybe we can post in the show notes, but criticism from various people over the last couple years about the importance of religion in comics and the importance of seeing comic characters come to understand religion as an institution that maybe they're born into or something that they go into. And so I think just from that regard, this is a great way to bring in a new audience, either of people that would call themselves Jewish, and hey, here's a character that they can identify with, or individuals that are interested in that, intersection of comic lore and religion as it exists in the real world. So I just, I jumped on this because of that. That's something that's made Marc so interesting to me as a character. And I really appreciated that.
All right, did you want to continue on that chat, or will I jump in first?
Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, I think some of the criticism is pretty unearned, calling this like, oh, why do we need another origin story? I feel like this isn't like replacing or changing. It really just does feel like filling out another part of his life. Like, I think the parts of the Lemire run we got, you could fit in after this. And, I think the way we saw, you see that one of the big aspects I'll pull up in a bit is the way DID manifests in this issue, how that happens with Stephen Grant appearing in the Lemire issue 10, and stuff like that, and this just sort of adds a bit to it. But I think one thing that is earned in this regard, because I feel like, Tommy, you covered a lot of it greatly, is just, I think one of the big things in this is just how much Khonshu groomed him in the Lemire run. Like, this definitely sets up the fall from faith, but I think there was a lot of joining that Egyptian faith and being so separated from his father due to Khonshu and the Lemire run that it just felt a little missed here. Like it's just such a strong connector and such a strong show of what kind of the evil Khonshu is marred with, just the the sad realities of life and parents being unequipped to deal with mental health, and obviously something as extreme like this happening here, it just feels a bit missed. Not like super bringing down, but like it just kind of something else I wanted in there, just to make it just kind of connect as well as the with the amazing Lemire run.
It's interesting that you mentioned the idea that like the parents that are unable to Connor, I'm gonna butcher your words here, but the parents that are unable to deal with or confront mental health problems or mental health issues, because when we see Rabbi Specter, Mark's father, I can't give you a page number here because I'm looking at the floppy right now. But this is the scene where after Mark gets the joke from Rabbi Yitz, where he asks, how does a Jew celebrate Christmas? And then Rabbi Yitz says he installs a parking meter on his roof, and very funny. But then we go directly to this scene, and in the floppy, there's no advertisement separating this. We go from a full page of 8 panels where we have this kind of jovial Mark. Rabbi Yitz is acting the fool, acting the clown, really getting buddy-buddy with Mark. And then we go into this a series of, let's see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, technically 5 or 6 panels, but 4 horizontal panels where you see this very, very stressed relationship between Mark and his father. And it's interesting because Mark's flashback in the frame story, Mark says that he essentially loved his father. He says his dad was great, which is something that I have never seen in a Moon Knight comic before. I've never seen my dad was great. I've always understood Mark's relationship with his father as something that has been stressed. He kind of regrets the fact that his father was his father. He looks back and sees his father as a failure. That's what I've felt, at least over the last 30 some years of Moon Knight. But here, Mark seems to be sympathetic with his father. And I know that a lot of that comes out of the trauma of the rest of the issue, and Mark starts to maybe realize in his conversation with Frenchie in that frame story that maybe his father knew about Ernst, maybe he knew about Rabbi Yitz and his real personality or his real identity. But if you look, and I don't know if you guys have the issue in front of you right now, but again, this is the series of panels where we have 8 panels of Rabbi Yitz and Mark Specter, and then on the next page you have the 4 or so panels of Mark in the garden with his father. And it's really interesting because Mark's father is shown watering the garden, but then in that same panel there's this offset where we have this close-up of Mark's father, the rabbi, right? This proud Jew who, as a religious leader, is set within this circular panel. And it almost creates this halo-like effect if you think about traditional Renaissance Christian imagery. And we see Rabbi Specter in the scene where he is zoned out, right? And then in the next panel, he's sweating, he's stressed, he doesn't know what's going on. Maybe he too is switching between different personalities. If we go with that idea that the DID that Mark has, and perhaps Beatrice, his daughter, has, is something that's hereditary, not just something that's set on by trauma. But he's kind of set within this traditional Christian panel, which I thought was something that was pretty bold and really made him stand out. But again, that really speaks to this idea that Mark is troubled in his relationships. He finds this really close relationship with Rabbi Yitz. He finds this stressed relationship with his father, who I would feel clearly has dedicated his life to Mark and loves him. But again, it's just that, beyond just religion, we also have this other thematic idea of the stressed relationship between father and son, which then plays out at the end of the issue with Mark and his daughter. So, again, even for a lot of the criticism for why this is maybe just an origin issue, it's another origin issue. Why do we have to do this? I really thought that this was a fairly sophisticated comic book. You know, there was a lot of prose, there was a lot of text, it was a lot of reading. I think I spent longer reading this issue than any other comic book that I've read in the last probably year or so. But I feel that there honestly were a lot of fairly complex thematic ideas that were played out throughout this book, trying to create a character that isn't just a beat 'em up, sock 'em on the street character. But this is Mark Spector is much more complex than even fans of 30, almost 40 years see him as. So
Yeah, I think there's a lot with the father and making him more lived in as a character. Just seeing that, you know, as much as he was a terrible father to Mark, in the end, you know, life isn't so black and white. There's a lot to do with Rabbi Spector's own personal demons as well, which I think showing the quiet and how it affects him as well was really well done. So, yeah, Chad, where would you like to lead us next?
Well, I would actually like to hit on a couple of those topics, like, not contrary-wise or anything. It's just, yeah, I was looking at the page number on the reader, and just to clarify, he's talking about page 9 with the garden scene. And, yeah, I completely saw that when I was going through the first few reads, just, like, the way that Rabbi Spector just zones. And he's clearly sweating. It's not like a small, like, graphical thing, because it's also a very sunny day. He is out there. He is not okay. And just the way that he interacts with Mark, they're in separate playing fields. Like, you can see Mark, he kind of looks over his, dad over his shoulder, and he is looking very confused, like, doesn't know what's going on over there. I honestly saw that entire scene as possibly, his father's been watering the same patch of garden for like 10 minutes. And the whole interaction with Rabbi Yitz on the previous panels, it really feels like Mark wants a different father. That's what I felt like. I don't know if I'm just reflecting on that differently and maybe projecting a bit, but it's just he's wanting and seeking out a father and chooses, well, whatever he can grab.
And I would agree. I mean, I think that is pretty clear that that Mark seems to be presenting this idea that he has this affinity for Rabbi Yitz, and he sees him as a male adult that is much more interesting than his father. I mean, if you just take a look at the text, Mark as the adult flashes back and says that I don't want to convey that I liked Yitz more than my dad. My dad was great. It's just that sometimes he wasn't all there. He would zone out sometimes and just disappear, which is, again, he's speaking to Frenchie here, whatever. But when he got too deep into it, you'd see a flash of something he knew, something he felt. And that is clear foreshadowing, I would feel, for the fact that Mark's father knows Rabbi Yitz's secret, or knows some inkling of that, or knows that Rabbi Yitz killed Mark's grandfather, or but there's something there. And I like the idea, I like the ambiguity that maybe Mark's father also had DID, and that would then lead into this idea that Beatrice, Mark's daughter with Marlene, or Jake's daughter with Marlene, however we want to look at that, perhaps also has DID, which we've spoken about before on ITK, the fact that she has pink hair, the fact that she has named herself Beatrice. I want to say that in the second issue or the third issue of this must be the third or the fourth issue of Bemis's run, where Beatrice, mentions this idea of separation too, in some subtext. But that's an interesting idea, that maybe there's this throughout Marc's genealogy, or throughout his family line, that maybe he has inherited this power, which manifests itself in the next couple pages, where he actually comes face to face with Ernst, and this new power comes within him, and this too, I think, would lead into an interesting conversation, Chad, where you were mentioning that, hey, maybe Marc is a mutant, or maybe he's inhuman, right? And that his power somehow comes alive in this moment of trauma. But I also would love to discuss the idea that maybe Marc's power really is based off of the power of the mind, or the power of religion and the power of faith, which is something that was spoken to directly by Khonshu in maybe issue 199, or not 199, excuse me, 189, the third issue of Bemis's run, where Khonshu, and there's the scene with Cthulhu, and Khonshu is trying to instruct Stephen and Jake and Marc and talk to them about the power of faith, and this idea that if you believe in something, you can create a power. And that was something that and if that applies here, with Marc fighting Ernst in the basement of the synagogue, and this idea that Marc, because of his DID, or because of this traumatic experience, wills something into power, that is so exciting to me, because that seems to speak to this idea that the human, this basic person, this basic character, if they have the will, they will find the way. And that seems to also share this idea that within the Marvel Universe, who cares about the Celestials? Who cares about the Eternals? Who cares about the Beyonder? Who cares about, the One Above All and the Tribunal? If you as a human will it, Marc Spector, right? You can have more power over anyone or anything. And that too, again, really brings me back to this idea of how Moon Knight is just my favorite Marvel character. I love the possibility here, because so many other characters within the Marvel Universe have these finite rules, right? Think like, and step outside with DC. Superman has his powers because of the yellow sun, right? But here, Marc Spector, we don't know anything. And I get that, okay, if we keep writing him, then we'll figure out his rule set and we'll be able to explain him. But at the end of the day, the mystery that's here right now seems to suggest to me that Marc Spector may not be the strongest hero in the Marvel Universe, but he has the greatest potential. And I just love that. And that's what this issue gave to me.
The power of crazy, baby. We're back.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly.
Yeah, I guess that also, I guess I'll just slide into my aspect, which is where sort of I divide into one of the why I love this issue and why I'm a bit iffy on this issue. So the real shocking stuff of this issue, the real driving force behind me talking about Marc being able to do this and escape Uncle Ernest, you're all Uncle Ernest, is that, this terrible event is something that would actually trigger his DID, which is something pretty important, understanding just what happened. This was something terrible that happened to him, something he never spoke about to anyone. It's why he manifested Stephen Grant as a friend, and why he's talking to Beatrice to, not be like his father, just sort of be open, be, supportive, be loving, make sure she has the best life she can, which is, a really, really strong thing, which definitely comes from, Max Bemis's thing of being a father himself, and, he's talking about his history with mental health as well, which is really strong. But I think this is just such a incredibly, disturbing scenario as well, that with this Nazi Jewish killing man hiding out as a as a Jewish rabbi, just it's just so intense that sometimes, like upon reading this and having to go through again and collect my thoughts, I think there's a lot of that which its intensity and its reason for being intense has a purpose, but I don't. It's kind of hard to explain because I also suck at explaining. Just doesn't quite sit with me always, despite the fact I know the what Bemis was trying to achieve here, and did achieve as well. There's just even with Bemis' history, there's just something about this specific scenario that just is so intense. It just doesn't always work to me as a reader living in this moment and seeing its intensity.
Do you feel that way because Ernst is a Nazi?
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely really tough, and I've been, sort of seeing opinions online and how this sort of changes. There's like a lot to do with, how this is coming from someone who is Jewish, because if this wasn't coming from someone who is Jewish, this would be incredibly problematic. But there's a lot to do with, using this history, I think, in a way which obviously reflects to Max Bemis that when coming to the page as someone who doesn't always, quiet connection just sometimes feels so intense and gross, regardless of like how well written, how put is like that incredible scene where Ernest describes the like living condition of Auschwitz, I believe, or just a camp. That incredible like was it like 2-page spread with all those panels? Like that was intense. Like you could feel the intensity coming through the page, and you're like, holy crap. But yeah, I don't know. There's something a bit icky about it, and something I guess I don't know. Like it's really tough. There just isn't that connection I want to have, and sometimes it just does feel a little, evil for almost evil's sake, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, assuming that Max Bemis has this history with Judaism. I'm not that familiar with him, but I'll trust you in the fact that he was raised Jewish. And I'm not Jewish. I can't speak to that. But within the last 100 years, the greatest evil that seems to have existed on our earth has taken, I think, multiple forms within the Western sentiment, right? We've moved from, hey, the Nazi regime was the greatest evil that ever has existed and ever will existed. But then, again, from the Western perspective, well, then you had the Islamic State, right? And they were crucifying Christians, and they were starving Yazidis, and they were decapitating even Muslims, and this and that. But then we're also, I think, disregarding the fact that, like, you have these terrorist groups, to use that name, but you also have these dictators, or you have these groups throughout the world that are committing genocide, arguably even in this minute right now. And the idea of trying to understand what evil is from a human perspective is something that is, I think, very difficult for many people. I think that for somebody that is growing up in the streets of Tokyo, or the streets of, I don't know, London, or the streets of Washington, D.C., or the streets of Melbourne, Australia, is going to be very, very different from one another based upon the experiences that they have. And so here we have, presumably, an author that has Jewish heritage writing a character that comes from a Jewish heritage, and in that character's mind, perhaps the Nazi mentality, the Nazi regime, is the ultimate form of evil on Earth. Forget Thanos, forget even Mephisto from the Damnation run, right? To make this real and to make this manifest in the world that the average comic book reader is coming from, the Nazis, for a Jewish character, represent the greatest evil, because that is the power that eradicated 6 million plus lives beyond all the other victims. And so I do understand this idea that, and Connor, to give credit to your point, that this is kind of intense, and this is just appropriating something that is used so commonly. But at the end of the day, Marc I mean, take a look at the last panel of this issue. He's still disturbed as he is holding his daughter Beatrice, as they are in her bed together, and he is snuggling with her, and he's trying to protect her, and he's trying to put her to sleep. And then you have that image of Ernst with those evil eyes, and that knife is bleeding off. And I don't mean bleeding as in like human blood. I mean the comic panel term here. The knife is the one part of that horizontal panel that is bleeding off of that image into the previous image, and that leaves Marc disturbed. And this is Marc Spector. This is the guy that arguably has less fear than Daredevil, right? This is the guy that wears white in order to scare the people that he's going after. He wants people to know that he's coming after them. And you have this one panel where he is upset, he's disturbed. Again, the Reddit commentary and the dissent, and I get the idea that, hey, we're using another Nazi character to scare another Jew. I get that. But I think that there's something underlying Marc Spector. There's something here that you don't necessarily have to be Jewish. You don't necessarily have to have Jewish heritage. You don't necessarily have to come from a faith system and have a strong faith in a god or whatever Godhead. But to have this idea that the ultimate form of evil, here it's manifest in this Nazi rabbi, right? The greatest irony of all. But regardless, any newcomer can come to this issue as an origin of Marc Spector and see that this is the greatest form of evil, and it's manifest in this way. And it might be different from my understanding of what that evil is, but this is the greatest form of evil, and that evil has shaped Marc Spector into the hero that he will become. And, in the moment, he gets this amazing power. It's thrown into him in that instant. Maybe it's Jake Lockley, maybe it's Moon Knight, maybe it's Khonshu, maybe it's Stephen Grant, and Stephen Grant knows how to throw down. But the fact is he kicks Ernst's butt, and he escapes that prison, and he becomes Moon Knight throughout his journey. So I can't say it enough. I really enjoyed this issue, and the religious aspect, the mix, the blend, maybe that's nothing for what Max Bemis was going after, but I came into the issue expecting meh, and I got a nice surprise, and I think this is a really great starting off point for the Moon Knight for the next 10 years.
Yeah, I definitely, I agree with that. I think, even with my problems with, what I was talking about, I think the way this shows how his DID manifested and that fear within him is just a really great idea for comics in general, but just really well implemented. Some of the best writing Bemis has done since he took the title. So yeah, that's sort of move on to Chad if you got anything to add, or move on to a next point. Take the reins here, boys.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on something really quick. The whole Rabbi Yitz thing. So, yeah, I'm looking at the page that Tommy was talking about with Yates just glaring. Like, he has an absolute fixation onto, the point of vision. And so the knife actually stretches off of the panel over into parts of, Marc and his scenery. And I'm just thinking about the possibility that Yates might actually still be coming after Marc.
Yes.
Really hammered it into the entire, focus of, when Marc was a kid, I will always come back. And it's just, the way he's thinking about it, he's, cuddling there with Beatrice. Everything's peachy. Everything should be fine. But Marc is shaken to this day.
Yeah, and I think you've got a note there, Tommy, about this as well, and I think it's one we all can seem to be concurring with, that this idea of immortality and pure evil, and going after Mark definitely seems like this is a big bad we'll probably see again if Max Bemis continues with this title for a while. Almost like the biggest of the bads we'll probably see Mark face in this.
But I think too with this idea that like Rabbi Yitz, or Ernst as he goes by, that he is always going to come after Mark. That doesn't matter because Mark believes that he's going to come after Mark, right? And that again speaks to the power of belief. This idea that, hey, if, as Khonshu mentions, with all that Cthulhu imagery in the third issue of Bemis's run, I want to say it is, that through the power of belief, you will these things to exist. And so if Mark believes in Khonshu, or if Mark believes in himself, or Mark believes in his 3 different identities beyond Khonshu, and Moon Knight, if we see that even as a 5th identity, right, that Mark can empower these different identities. The fact is, regardless of this idea that, hey, Adolf Hitler is dead, he commits suicide almost 100 years ago, right? 75 years ago. Rabbi Yitz here, right? He says he's empowered. He says that he has a super serum. He says that, he can prolong his life by continuing to conduct these murders and continuing to pleasure this dark center of his mind. So maybe Rabbi Yitz, maybe Ernst still is extant. Maybe he is going to be a villain that we're going to see again. But the fact is, none of that matters, because if Mark believes that Rabbi Yitz is extant, if Ernst is still alive, then that's going to trouble Mark. Perhaps, even then, if Mark believes that Ernst exists, then maybe Ernst will exist so long as Mark wills that into existence. And I just, again, coming from a religious aspect, this idea that people have the power to have a faith, people have a power to will things into existence, people have the power to empower themselves and empower others through belief and through faith. I just think that that's really cool. But also here, dangerous, because Mark is clearly troubled, he's upset, he's afraid, and he has not let go of this little nugget of Ernst. He can't forget. He's telling Frenchie, remember that. He's telling his best friend, his confidant. He's telling somebody something that he has never told Marlene, and up to this point, his daughter Beatrice. Mark is telling Frenchie first, and he's confirming this idea that he has this belief that Ernst still exists. And because of that, I think Ernst does exist, and perhaps will cause some trouble in the future. But again, I just think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if Ernst ever comes back. This is going to be something that for the foreseeable future is going to be at the center of Mark Spector. It's going to be something at the center of Moon Knight. This idea that, regardless of who the next writer is, Mark's religious background, his descent of that faith, that's important. But the fact that he has an original nemesis in Ernst, that's going to keep him going, and that's going to challenge him. So, if you recall, Max Bemis mentioned in an interview before the series came out that, hey, I think everybody are really going to like this next run. We're going to create a character that is going to be kind of like Batman's Joker for Moon Knight, and everybody thought, hey, it's going to be the Sun God, right? It's going to be Patient 80, it was 86, is that his name?
Yeah, 86.
Yeah, it's going to be Patient 86. I'm dubious. I kind of feel that maybe Mark's Joker is Ernst. And maybe Ernst manifests himself through different villains or different enemies. But at the end of the day, Ernst is Ernst. Ernst is this original memory of carnage. Ernst is this original trauma. Ernst is this original, honestly, in a way, original sin. And Ernst is what brought about Mark Spector's trauma. So the end of Moon Knight, the end of Stephen Grant, the end of Jake Lockley, perhaps the end of Mark Spector is the end of Ernst. And so therefore, the two of them, because all of those identities come out of this character, they're eternally intertwined. And if one of them dies, the other dies. So I don't know. I know that that's kind of crazy, and I know that Chad, you've got these mutant theories, and I want to respect that, but I think Ernst is a real deal right now. I think this is the one, and it's honestly that third to last panel on the last page of the comic with that knife bleeding out in that crimson red. It stays with Mark. I don't know. I'm super excited. I'd love to see where this goes.
Yeah, I think great discussion. Who wants to pull us into the? I just took that aspect. Then who wants to take us to the next aspect?
I kind of have an aspect that I'd like to talk about a little bit. Family. We've been talking about family a lot on different subjects, especially about religion. But there's this thing about the entirety of family and his unity is, he's betrayed constantly, Mark Spector, by different aspects of his own life, like the dissonance with Jake, and Jake going behind his back, having extramarital relations with Marlene. It's just problematic. No matter where he turns, his family is somewhere lapsed. The only sacred part seems to be Beatrice, well, until last issue, and that's just kind of this recurring problem with him. That his family would like to be there for him, but can never manage to save him from whatever falling out he has with his own faith in himself.
Yeah, I think my favorite parts of the issue being the discussion Mark is having with Beatrice. Like, it's just so perfectly balanced with the terribleness of his past and that willingness for like almost the one thing of his life. Beatrice's and Marlene have suffered through a lot, and Beatrice is there because of betrayal, basically, as you said. But there's still, it's like the one thing he's clinging on to now, even as we saw in the last issue as well. That panel, it really just feels so sweet and sincere, and actually showing the one thing Mark Spector is caring about, and that progression of character to actually be here and go, this is how I change from my past to someone else's future, helping his daughter, talking to his daughter, and there's just so many sweet moments there. It's so genuinely strong and sincere, and there's great panels and dialogue of Beatrice actually being a kid, the Dizzy Otis, and all that with the dissociative identity disorder, and that just whole discussion just feels like such a new step for the character, but one so born from everything that's happened with Mark's past and with family, essentially, and everything like so many writers have cultivated before that. I'll jump into like my last bit I really want to talk about with this issue is just artwork. I think I was really shocked to see him come onto this. I know him best as the Batman Adventures artist. He's an incredible cartoonist. He built such a distinctive look from the TV show and his own brilliance. And in the same way, and he's almost like he took the Batman animated series and made it his own. He's actually taken what Smallwood did, obviously, being such a big fan in the way that incredible run did with the past and Mark's origin before, is sort of retaken it and, taken it into his own style and just made such a beautiful issue.
I thought the artwork was fantastic, and I would agree, but I don't know Ty Templeton from previous work as well as you do, Connor, but I do want to say that it just seems like he took a lot of cues from Smallwood's design. Beyond like the regular editing marks, like we can say that Mark's the scar over his left eye from the attack by Raoul Bushman is present. I think that's pretty cool that we have this editing mark, but there's so many different scenes, not only in the first few panels of the issue where we have the adult Mark talking to Frenchie, but also several of the panels that show Mark as the child. They seem to be modeled perfectly after Greg Smallwood's run with Jeff Lemire, which I'm not complaining about. I like the idea that the art lends itself to a previous the immediate series preceding this, and that then seems to legitimize the connections that some of what Max Bemis is writing permits or allows to show connections between what Lemire has already reestablished for the character. I think that that's really cool. But at the same time, I think too that there were inconsistencies, like some of the drawings of Marlene and Beatrice, especially the shots of them far away, where they're talking about the Shoah, they're talking about the Holocaust, and that spread that goes across the 2 pages in the center of the issue. There just seemed to be some kind of instances where there were some discrepancies, and some panels made Beatrice look like she was 2.5 or 3 years old. Some made her look where she was 7 years old. Some made Marlene look like she was 30-year-old, blonde-haired, mother, whereas other issues made her look like she was late teen babysitter, that was joining Marc and his daughter for a jaunt in the park, which, read into that how you want. But so that's one thing that I just thought was like, but then the action scenes, wow, the action scenes were great. Templeton, I think, did a great job, especially in the basement of the synagogue and that secret cellar. If you flip to the page, it's right after the 2-page panel of the Shoah description, the description of the Holocaust, where Marc strikes out. This is what I would call his transformation. This is where Marc becomes Moon Knight in a way. I shouldn't say that, because technically Marc doesn't become Moon Knight until Egypt. But this is where Marc's DID sets in, so maybe this is the Jake Lockley setting in. But there are several panel bleeds, and the first that you notice, honestly, is the second to last panel of the page, because Marc's bloody fist almost bleeds all the way into the first panel of the page, and it's just, oh boy, is it cool. And he's got his yarmulke on this whole time, and so it shows that, in this moment, Marc's faith is still at his center, and it's almost like he's defending his faith against this fake rabbi, this Nazi, this serial killer. He's still centered in who he is as and who he was raised as. Or maybe if this is Jake Lockley taking over him, or maybe if this is Khonshu coming into him, which I would love to connect this part of the conversation to the cover page by Becky Cloonan. Maybe this version of Marc, or this part of his identity, or this aspect of his identity, doesn't realize that the yarmulke is still on. Maybe he hasn't shed that yet. And then you go into that last panel on this page where Marc is trying to escape, and he seems like he's afraid. And that's the point where Ernst says, "I always come back." And I love that, because for all the rage, for all the excitement, for all the strength, for all this hidden energy and this hidden power that Marc shows, regardless of whose identity has taken over him at this point, that last panel, the first word on that in that panel is Marc, and Rabbi Yitz is calling out after him, and Ernst is calling out after him and calling him Marc, and I think that that's Marc in that panel, and Marc is afraid. This isn't Stephen Grant, this isn't Jake Lockley, this isn't Moon Knight, this isn't some embodiment of Khonshu, maybe, if that's possible, right? If we were to go back to Lemire issue number 10, I think it is, where Khonshu actually manifests himself in this hallway outside the psychiatrist's office and talks to Marc. In this panel, in issue 194 here, Marc is trying to climb up the ladder, he's trying to escape, and Ernst says, "I always come back." And I think that that's the connection to those last couple panels of the entire issue, where we see that Marc is present with Beatrice. He's in her bed, he's holding her, he's snuggling with her, he's trying to show her, like, hey, I'm your father, I'm here, I'm ready to protect you. But that bleeding knife and that scary man from my youth is still very present. So just, Templeton, I'm looking forward to it, because I think Templeton's on the next few issues, right?
No, it actually changes for an artist who does.
Really? Who's taking 195
after that?
Sorry, Connor. What'd you say? Who's on 195?
195. I'm just pulling it up now. I can't quite remember the artist off the top of my head, but yeah, he basically is doing the next two runs, and then two issues, and then Burroughs returns after that.
Right. But Templeton is sticking around for a little bit though.
No, I'm pretty sure it's just this issue.
Oh, so somebody else is coming on for the next couple, and then Burroughs returns.
Yeah.
It's Lopes.
Oh,
That's it.
well, let's hope they all do it justice, right?
Yeah, as good as this, honestly.
But Becky Cloonan's on for the next bit though, as the cover artist though, right?
Yeah. It's, let's see, we got Cloonan for 195 and 196. She's got that very centered and zen brain cover for 196.
Yeah, that's right. And so the next issue is the collective.
Yeah.
And then and that 196, boy, that looks cool. I did want to say though that for 194 here, Cloonan's art I think is really, really cool, because if you take a look at the cover art for 194 here, you have this specter, and I mean Specter, or RE if you will, British English if we do that, where you have the specter of Moon Knight in these rags, almost like a ghost, a spirit hanging over Marc Spector, right? And Marc Spector as this child, he looks kind of hip. He's got these kind of good fitting pants, but he's got this huge, massive crescent. And if you take a look at his eyes are perfectly white, and he looks empowered. And one thing that I really just noticed tonight is that if you take a look at this cloak that is on this child Marc Spector on the cover of 194, the ghost, the specter, the reaching arms of Moon Knight, which we can presume is Khonshu, right? Or this aspect of Moon Knight, actually stems out of this cloak. So on Marc Spector's right side, the cloak droops down onto the ground, and it just seems like he's wearing a cape. But then the left side of this cloak, which again we would read as the protective covering of Khonshu, this white cloak, actually turns into the specter, turns into the spirit of Moon Knight that climbs over him. And that's something I just noticed tonight, but I think that that's so cool, this idea that Moon Knight is the cape is Moon Knight. If Moon Knight's Khonshu, Khonshu is the cape, but they're all Marc Spector too, and they're all tied into this body. There's this tight connection. There's something that binds them all together, and I just feel like Becky Cloonan's art does that anew and afresh for the first time in a long time. You know, this is less the Moon Knight of, say, Vengeance of the Moon Knight, less of Houston. This is not the action-packed, beat 'em up, sock 'em up, street level, and this is more the psychological Moon Knight. This is at this point really the successor to Lemire's run, and I think that's really cool. And I think that Cloonan's art does a good job of bridging that.
Yeah, I think it's like you're so right. It's such like a new reinvigoration. Becky Cloonan is an incredible artist. I'd love to actually see her do an issue here, but there's something so amazing. You're right about it coming out of the cape, which I didn't notice, but also just in general, it's like the first time we see Moon Knight not as some like a parasite entity attached. You know, it's part of him. It's protecting him. It's alongside this empowered boy ready to fight is also this cape manifesting as something to fight alongside. It's symbiotic. They're not symbiotic, whatever. It's like it's natural. They're connected. It's like almost side by side together instead of against each other.
Yeah. Which I think, the symbiotic relationship, and not to like draw on Venom and Carnage and all those, but that's what this cover really seems like. And honestly, if you think about it, at this point in Marc's development with Khonshu, Khonshu needs Marc, and in many cases, as we see in the Houston run in 2006 run, Marc needs Khonshu, and so it is a symbiotic relationship. It's not some alien organism or some alien biometric suit that's been created. This is something that's spiritual, or this is something that's psychological. At the end of the day, this is something that is not explained yet. There's, in fact, from a couple episodes ago, the ITK, Connor, you and Ray took a look at the Houston number 4, which I think was called, that's from the bottom. And I think that there were 6 issues in the bottom. And so this is, number 4 at the bottom. But that's where we are introduced to the, what's his name? He's the guy that can read everybody.
The profile?
The profile, right, yeah. And so the profile says in that issue that these supernatural types, that he has the hardest time with them because he can't read them, right? They're not mutants. They're not. And so, Chad, that would be my sticking point, right? Houston's Run, issue number 4. The profile says Moon Knight's not a mutant. But, stranger things have happened. But these supernatural types are the toughest to read. And so I love that. I love this idea that all the editors that we've had with Marvel, all the writers have kept this consistency. So for as inconsistent as Moon Knight has been, there's been this consistency that he's inexplicable. You cannot properly explain Moon Knight. And so I like that because even with this origin issue, it says Moon Knight origin in the first couple pages of 194. And I know that turns a lot of people off. Reddit exploded. But even with this quote-unquote origin issue, there is still so much to Moon Knight that hasn't been explained because perhaps he can't be explained. He's loony Moony, he is that's the reason why so many of us love this character. And even though we try to explain it, maybe he can never be explained.
Hell yeah. So that kind of
I encourage the explanation. I encourage, let's look into this character. Let's figure him out. But I know that at the end of the day, there's never going to be one series where we're going to point to and say, yep, we figured him out. Because that's Mark Spector's struggle. He's trying to figure himself out. And I feel like he never will be able to. And that, makes him a tragic character. But I think that that's also why many of us come to this character. We see him as a tragic character. We know he's never going to succeed. But we constantly are there behind him, wanting him to succeed. And that's what I think makes reading Moon Knight a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, that kind of ties up my points. What anything you two want to have to talk about, add to as well before we wrap up this review?
I think we've said what we had to say, but I just wanted to kind of talk about the cape thing that you guys were talking about. The possibly symbiotic relationship between Khonshu and Marc, and kind of making them, what's the right term, like the way that they
parasitic.
mesh. Yeah, the way that they're basically parasites off of each other. They mesh together, and together they make Moon Knight. They're not separated. Like, they can't operate without each other. It really reminded me of, have you read much Spawn? Because that's what it really reminds me of. Because this...
Yeah, I haven't read much Spawn. As a child of the 90s, I saw a lot of Seth MacFarlane. Or is it Seth MacFarlane? But McFarlane Toys
Todd
commercials
McFarlane.
And Todd McFarlane, that's right. Seth MacFarlane's Family Guy, right?
Yeah.
But and then news that there might be a new Spawn coming out, funded completely by McFarlane, and I think that's really cool. But I would absolutely agree, and I want to. I don't think I can speak to it as well as you can, but just the idea that you have this parasite or you have this entity that exists because of another entity, and that's a really cool idea.
So Spawn's suit is like this. It's a creature in itself, and it runs off the necroplasm that runs in his veins. It like a specialized fuel for, supernatural powers. Well, it has its own opinions, it has its own things, but, when it comes down to it, every hell spawn that gets pumped out of hell, they all have this suit. and it generates different effects that complement the wearer. It's rarely the same, and it always has the same, modus operandi. It just, helps the Hellspawn in its endeavors. Like, even when Spawn is, resurrected, it clings to him when he's no longer dead. When, at one point, he's no longer even a Hellspawn. At one point, he's, out there doing average, everyday stuff, just fighting supernatural entities, and it's still there with him. And I feel like, even though he hasn't hit his, what's the right term? Point of origin, in that cellar basement, he hasn't come out in his own yet, but he still has this spirit harbored within himself. And it I have this theory, another one, that a lot of, like, the...
Moon Knight's an inhuman?
No. I have this theory about the gods and belief systems in the Marvel Universe, that because they're multidimensional creatures, they don't exactly exist in one point of time, they exist across all time. So I think that because they're intertwined, Khonshu can sort of generate himself along the timeline of Mark Spector.
That might be a really interesting concept episode, Connor, and to spread to Ray, but this idea that, can we find evidence within Moon Knight's run, but also within his guest appearances for this and other series within the Marvel Universe, of this idea that Chad's bringing up, that gods, like within the traditional sense, not just like Thanos or the Celestials or these, the celestial beings, but like gods from the human perspective, are they arguably more powerful than most other entities within the Marvel Universe? And especially when you think about the multiverse, do they just manifest themselves as they feel necessary within the time that they feel necessary? So, Chad, I think that's a really cool idea, and I'd love to take a look at that in the future.
Yeah, I think there's also actually a lot of weight behind that as well, with a lot of stuff to do with like different planes of existence, and especially the, pantheon of the Black Panther, and actually Christopher Priest's Black Panther run that actually uses Moon Knight and Khonshu in that dimension actually brings a lot of weight to your theory if you haven't checked out those issues, the Moon Knight appearances in Black Panther.
Yeah, those are cool. I love those issues, but unfortunately, I think Christopher Priest, what he did with Khonshu and Moon Knight in those is he used those more as like a scapegoat, or maybe scapegoat's the wrong term, but but Moon Knight was, and even Khonshu were like specters. They were parts of like Black Panther's dream or something like that. But still, you have this idea that Bast, which is the Panther god or the Panther goddess, right? Which is the goddess of Wakanda. That is something that comes out of, in our world, ancient Egyptian culture. And I know that some of our earliest conversations in the ITK community were exploring the Lemire run, taking a look at the possibility that Bast might even play a role in Lemire's run as this panther god or as this cat god, because there's a connection between Khonshu and Bast in the ancient Egyptian pantheon. That I want to say that like Khonshu is the daughter, or excuse me, Khonshu is the son or the nephew of Bast or something like that. But the possibilities based off of actual human imaginings are infinite, and so I just think that in the future it'd be a lot of fun to take a look at that aspect.
Yeah, I really agree. I think that's totally something worth looking into, and hopefully getting out maybe sooner rather than later.
shall we get into Crescent Dart ratings?
Yeah, if you guys have totally, if we feel like we've covered this, and I think there's been a lot of great discussion. I think we'll totally, and we'll kick it off with you, Tommy. I think.
All right, I'm going to give it a 1. No, I'm
Oh,
kidding.
perfect.
After 2 hours of conversation, no, I know that I'm probably kind of biased here, and I really enjoyed it, but I'm going to give this issue a 4. It's an origin issue, and I know that many listeners and many readers, they don't want an origin issue. But I think that if we are going to have an origin issue, I was really pleased with this. I remember I picked it up from my comic book store. I talked to my owner, had a great conversation, went into my car before I drove home. I read the issue, and I remember smiling all the way home. So I'm going to give Bemis's 194 a 4 out of 5 Crescent Darts.
Yeah, perfect. Chad?
Honestly, I think I'm gonna go ahead and give it a 3, but a strong 3. Yeah, 3 crazed Nazi rabbi serial killers. It's 3 too many. But I really liked it. I have opinions about it. I liked the fact that if they're going to do an origin, it's jumping in at the origin of the person, and when he became, a hero, he started doing heroic things. Not just, hey, we're going to talk about this time he was a kid. But he actually developed his persona, and it was important. It needed to be looked at. And, yeah. How about you, Connor?
I think I'm a bit torn on this issue. I think it's fantastic in a lot of ways. I think it's handling of DID. I think it's credible art, credible coloring. I think it has some of the strongest dialogue Bemis has done yet. But I think its thematic positioning and that grey area does bring it down for me a bit. I think outside of that, it's a really strong one shot, an origin issue that doesn't quite act as an origin issue, explores some interesting areas, does it beautifully in art and in some parts of his dialogue, but I think thematically it does bring it down for me to, I think, I'll probably sit in the middle of about I'll go to 3.5. I'll sit nicely in the middle of you two. I think there's a lot of strength to this. There are some areas I'd rather pick up on, but I'm definitely not sad I read this, nor unhappy with what this does for Moon Knight as a character. I think it builds in a lot of different ways, and I'm very interested to see with what Bemis does with these one-shots in the future now, so yeah. And I think the discussion points it's brung alone in this episode are like show enough that there's a lot to this issue, regardless of whether it always perfects it or not. Right, yeah. So that was this week's review. Next week, we return to our classic runs with Hulk Magazine, Volume 114, and Moon Knight, Volume 5, Issue 5. We continue with the bottom run by Houston that we have talked about in this episode plenty as well for its greatness. And I think before I sign us all off, you two boys got anything to plug?
I'll plug Chad. I think, Chad, you're great. You did a nice job. There you go.
Aw, I think I'm gonna cry. No, it's really great. I really wanted to step up and do this. I really enjoy ITK, and, it's great that I was able to finally step into an episode with you, Tommy, and Connor, actually able to make it today. Thank you.
That feels like a call out more than a shout out.
And then I think, too, we should plug Nicola Scott and Tom Taylor.
Yes.
They appeared at King's Comics in Sydney, and Ray was able to interview them. And I know that Ray went to Free Comic Book Day out of selfish reasons. Not that any of us are holding that against him, but we know that Ray had a really great time, and he was able to meet 2 Aussie creators, which I think is really cool. So good for you, Ray, and also Nicola Scott and Tom Taylor. Thanks for helping to make ITK a stronger community.
Hell yeah, and big thank you to you two for coming on. You know, I think we were even talking about having just an hour episode, and we've had our hiccups along the way with technology that are probably going to be a bit apparent despite our editing. But we've had almost 2 hours of great discussion, and I couldn't have done without you, Chad, and you, Tommy. So thank you for joining us and making ITK bigger and more of a community as well. And
our pleasure, I'm sure. So.
Thank you all very much for joining us as well, all at home. Thank you once again, Chad and Tommy. And you can find us in that Facebook group where we met Chad and Tommy at facebook.com/group/ITK Moon Knight. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/ITK Moon Knight. Our website with everything on it, all our links, all our episodes, newsletters, the collective we're a part of, our podcast group, Into the Night podcast.wordpress.com. You can email us feedback on this episode or anything you're thinking about with moonlightpodcast@gmail.com. We're on Twitter at ITK Moon Knight. Just search Into the Night, a Moon Knight podcast on all good podcast catches, Instagram, Tumblr, YouTube. And make sure you join our group. It's a great place for discussion. Yeah. Thank you all for joining us once again. And as we always say, may Khonshu watch over the denizens of the night. Goodbye.
Moon Knight and affiliated characters, stories and events are properties of Marvel Characters Incorporated. Materials used and discussed within the podcast are intended for critique and review purposes only under the fair dealing concept of the current Copyright Act. The views, information or opinions expressed during the podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the copyright owners.